Hello, welcome to another episode of The High Ground, powered by Premier Companies. Ryan, how are you doing today?
Doing great so far. How are you?
Good. I'm looking forward to this next. I'm looking forward to all the podcasts, but this one's going to be very interesting.
It's a real Wingdinger, as a shooter said on Hoosiers.
Yeah. We got, well, first, I'd like to say just like and subscribe. That's important to us, important to so we can show our CEO that people are actually liking this and subscribing to it. But then in the podcast room with us today, we've got our in-house Grant Vondielingen, and he is our director of credit for Premier Egg. How you doing?
Doing good. How are you?
Good. And then also Lewis McIntire, and he is vice president of CoBank.
Sal, thank you for inviting me.
Well, thanks for coming. Hey, before we get started, and this year we're going to start doing something a little fun before we get kicked off here. We're going to have a question of the day, and today's question is, and Grant, you're going to find this out, but once you get over 40 years old, the weight doesn't come off like it does. And sometimes we have diets that we try to do. And what is your diet Achilles heel cheat food what prevents us from all being, having the six pack flat belly golf swings? Lewis, start us off. What is your diet Achilles heel?
So my wife likes to make cookies on the side, and so I help sample those, and that sampling of those cookies causes my six-pack.
Because you got to do half a dozen cookies to at least.
Yes, absolutely. Quality control.
Grant, what's your...
Just anything my wife fixes. I just overeat every time I eat.
Boy,
probably.
To timestamp this, we're coming up on Valentine's Day, so we've got two plugs for the wives already.
Happy Valentine's Day, Heather.
Yeah. Mine's ice cream. We can't have it in the house. I don't care what flavor it is. If it's in the bottom of the deep freeze, I will dig it out.
Yeah.
No such thing as freezer burned on ice cream, I don't think.
I would agree. It'd be ice cream as well for me, but I've come closer to foundering on ice cream than I have on salad.
Yeah.
So hey, we're going to kick this off, and I guess to preface this, Lewis, you've done a fantastic job of preparing this presentation for us, and what we're going to do is compare the top third performers in grain farmers versus what the bottom third performers in grain farmers are, and highlight some of the differences. We're going to bounce back and forth between what's different today with the higher interest rates that we're dealing with and the comparisons that we hear in passing conversations. And man, it's just like the 70s and 80s again. And so we want to talk about what's different, what's the same, and then we want to get into some of those metrics that you look at in the research that's been put together that says the top performing grain farmers in the country versus the bottom performers, and get into how that's all correlated and researched out. So we'll kind of let you kick it off with who you are and how this all got started.
Yep. So thank you, Ryan, for inviting me up. This is a passion of mine, is financial benchmarking. I do this quite a bit for different people on a lot of different topics. Today we're going to talk about row crop farmers. And I gathered this from my career when I was working at CoBank, and I'd been a loan officer for 10 years, and then I decided I wanted to become a general manager for running a cooperative for 16 years. And when I left the bank, I had so much information at my fingertips of what people were doing well. And once I got on the other side, I no longer had that information. So what I did was search out sources of information. And the information database that we're going to use today is RMA. It's a database that comes from commercial banks, and they pull that information. That they've been doing this since 1918, and they pull financial information on the row crop farmers. And what they do is they don't have their names on the balance sheets or income statements, and it allows us to look at their information over the 50 states and how they're performing, and that's where we get that information from.
Great. We should mention also to our listeners, we're going to put the PowerPoint up, and then we'll also have this available on our website, maybe a link.
Yeah, we're going to put a link to this entire presentation on our website.
Great. So. Well, Lewis, start us off here, and we'll catch up.
So what I want to do today on page 2, we want to talk about why some farmers are successful and why others not. We want to give you the database to help you to look at that. We want to talk about row crop values, why farmland values increasing and what we're seeing there. We want to talk about 1980s, and we compare today. A lot of the farmers I work with say, are we heading into the 1980s? And we'll talk about that some more. And then we'll get into the actual hard data, the financial benchmarking of grain farmers. We have 2 databases that we'll go over with you.
Great.
Okay. All right. So you just drive. We'll just fill in. So.
Okay. So on page 3 of the presentation, farm income has been very good with the higher grain prices. Farmers have done good. The USDA projects that the net cash for farmers will be $187 billion in 2022. And we're seeing these values substantially higher than what it has been since 2016. So when we look over on page 4, we're looking at the debt levels of the farmers. They're in pretty good shape. When I started my career with the 1980s, it was very tough. And you can see that in the 80s, it was much higher, the debt levels. But those debt levels are down right now. And if you flip on to page 5.
And you could see that spike there back in the mid 80s where it really peaked out there.
Yep. In the 80s, that was very tough times. Many farmers who lived through the 80s, they don't forget it. Banking getting loans was a challenging time. Commodity prices were very low. There was a lot of issues back then.
There was a couple really tough crops, short crops as well, and there's no crop insurance. So their net farm income decreased. Maybe they didn't have enough money to put out a crop the next year, so they had to borrow more money. So that added to this.
So what we're seeing is when you flip on into 2022, the row crop values, particularly in Indiana, they're about on average $7,750 per acre. That's up 14%. What's driving that?
From last year?
Yes.
Okay.
So what's driving that is the farm income is doing better. And we're going to talk later in the presentation. There's a group of farmers that are doing very well, and they have money, cash money, to buy land. They've waited 30 years to buy that farm next to them. Now they've got the cash, and they're bidding high prices for the land. One of the questions the farmers always ask me on page 6 is are we going into the 1980s? And I always tell the farmer no. And the reason being is in the 80s we saw the prime rate peak out in that 20% range. Inflation peaked out at 13.5. The debt levels are much higher back in the 80s compared to today. Farm income was $51 billion compared to today. It's substantially higher. And as Grant made the comment, in 1983, when we had a drought, we had no crop insurance. So, it was a very tough time if you didn't have the crop insurance. The other part was that the farm credit system ran into some financial troubles themselves. And when your banker runs out of money, it's not a good situation. Actually, the farm credit system had to go through with Senator Lugar, which was the senator back then for the state of Indiana, had to go to Washington, D.C. and get a line of credit for $4 billion to get the farm credit system.
To put liquidity in the
yes.
loaning.
Yep.
Lending institution.
It was tough times. So if you look at today, we're going into 2022, we see interest rates, for the most part, are much more modest. I know we've seen some increases here lately, but it's not a prime rate of 20%. So that makes a big difference. The other part is most farmers have bought land. They have used fixed rate products much more aggressively than in prior years. Inflation, yes, is high, but it's not high compared to 13.5%. So farm income has been really strong, and we're seeing overall lower debt levels compared to assets. We do have the crop insurance that we've mentioned before, and some banks will only lend so much on real estate. Most banks that I'm familiar with have planned for a 25% reduction in the price of real estate, so they have built in planning for this. And there is, on the other part, is commercial banks, and the farm credit system is in financially very strong position.
Okay, very good. That's some comfort.
Yep. So on page 8, you'll see that the farm credit system is very financially strong compared to the 1980s. They literally ran out of liquidity and needed that $4 billion. Today, the farm credit system is $343 billion, but they had a net profit of $6.8 billion last year. So their balance sheet is very strong, capitalized at 15.9%. And in 1988, we learned from our mistakes, and they've created a fund. It's $6.5 billion to allow for future losses. So they have set aside a reserve for challenging times. Plus, they have a backup line of credit of over $10 billion in case things don't go right. So there's a lot of planning that's been put in place in the 2020 versus 1980.
So they have access to that $10 billion. There's no balance on that line of credit right now?
That balance is zero. That's correct.
The 25% cushion in that you mentioned about as far as the real estate values, is that kind of a predictive, or is that just a safety net that they kind of put that in there?
So they looked at back in 1980, some of the values when they decreased, and what they built in was when they're making loans today is what they're doing is they're forecasting in the future, and they said, what if this customer has their real estate go down by 25%? Could we still make their loans? In the lion's share of cases, those customers still would qualify for lending. So things are much different. The planning process that's in place today is much stronger and better.
Good.
So what I want to do today, in something I'm very passionate about, is financial benchmarking. So if you're a row crop farmer and you're hearing this presentation, what I want you to start thinking about is, okay, how am I doing, and how do I compare to the average, and how do I compare to the top 25% and the top third? And what we're going to do today is give you those tools in order to do that.
And the data group, the database of this is 75 farmers from all over the U.S., and this is row crop data only.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And so the database on page 10 comes from, that I mentioned earlier, it comes from the commercial banks. This is something that if you go in and you sit down with your commercial banker and say, hey, have you heard of RMA? Most of the banks are familiar with it, and they can get you this information that I'm referring to. If you look at the very bottom of page 10, you'll see that there's 580 industries in this. We're going to pick out the one today is the row crop farmers. There's 140,000 data points in here, financial statements. What ensures confidentiality is that the names have been removed, so that it allows the banks to send this information in and gives you access to this information. On page 11, RMA allows me to present this information as long as I give the disclaimer that's on page 11, so you see that. So let's jump into what Ryan was talking about. We're going to talk about 75 farmers, and they don't know who they are, and we don't know who they are, but their data has been submitted to the RMA, and it's from April the 1st, 2021 through March 31st, 2022. And what we want to do is look at grain farmers over a 5-year period of time. We also want to look at information based on size. A lot of farmers talk about size. Does size make a difference? So Sal, what we're going to do today is have information for the small farmer to compare to the larger farmer. Good. And then also what we want to do is talk about the top 25%. What is the top 25%? When I was a general manager at Shelby County Cooperative, one of the things I wanted to do back in the day was to know what was I doing well and what was I doing wrong. And the only way I could do that was to compare myself to everybody else. And so the 3 ratios that we're going to focus on today is the current ratio, cash that remains after you make your mortgage payment, and then also your debt to equity ratio. So that'll kind of give you a barometer of the information, will help you to decide how you're doing compared to the industry.
Great.
Yeah, this is good.
So on page 13, if you're looking at page 13, and this information will be available on the website, we're looking at 75 farmers. That's down from 116 farmers the year before in 2021. The first arrow you'll see is a number 1. If you look at that, is 19.7%. That means that the farmer has cash and cash equivalents of $19.10 compared to $100 in assets. Does that make sense? So the other thing I like to do is talk to when you flip on down is the debt levels. So when you look at the debt, it's you'll see a number 8.1. That's $8.10, and that's the amount of money that the farmers owe on short-term obligations. So it's $8.10 compared to $100 in assets. If you look right below that, you'll see another line that says current portion of term debt. It's $3.60. And if you flip on down to the arrow where it says number 3, you'll see that number 19.5. So, Brian, one of the questions I'd ask you is, what is the average years that a farmer has to pay back his mortgage obligations? What do you think that would be?
Well, you'd think 10 to 15 years, probably.
Yeah, because you think about the real estate, that would be a good guess.
And there are rules that you're not allowed to ask the host any questions.
Yeah, Lewis, this works a lot better if there's no questions.
Exactly.
All right.
Wow. New guest. New guest.
Breaking all the rules. So,
We need to get that on the wall.
all right. So
That's my guess. If you're going to force me, it's
well, that's a good guess. But let's look at the data and see what the data tells us. So we take the 3.6, we add it to the 19.5, we come up with 23.1. We divide that number by 3.6, you're going to get 6.4.
6.42 is actually, I bet that's the correct answer.
That is the correct answer. So Ryan was off just a little bit.
Wow.
But that's okay.
Sal.
Sorry.
But the good thing is now we know what the average is. So, Sal, the question for you, if you're 15 years, is that good or bad?
Yeah, Sal.
Well, it depends. How's that?
Well,
Is that a good answer?
Depends is the right answer.
You get run over in the middle of the road, you know that, right?
So it depends on your farming operation. So let's take a farmer who's 65 years old and he has no term debt. He's getting to the point later in life and he doesn't want any obligations to the bank. But Sal, let's say you're 25 years old, you just got married, you got a young kid, you bought the neighbor's farm, and you have a 15 or 20-year mortgage, then you got to factor in your situation, what you're doing. So the average is nice to know, 6.4, but you have to factor in what is your farming operations, what are you doing? You could be 65 years old and have a 15-year mortgage. Is that a bad thing?
No, if you got a plan, probably. If you got a plan to pass that along or to retire.
So let's say that's a good example. So I'm 65 years old and I'm helping, let's say, one of the family members get into farming, and I bought the farm, and the plan is that eventually my son or my daughter is going to take over the farming operation. So having a 15 or 20-year mortgage at 65 is okay. It all matters is what's your situation, what is your plan. So that's a good answer.
Okay.
So what we want to do now is we want to flip over to page 14, and we take these 75 grain farmers. They have $100 of revenue. Last year they finished up net profit after they paid all their expenses before they pay their taxes was $10.60. So when we compare them to the year before, they were $5.90.
And then exactly double of 2020.
Yeah, so the farmers have done well. Now you see why that the graph that I was showing you earlier about land values, why they're going up. The farmers have done well, and they have cash, and now they have an opportunity to buy that neighbor's farm. They're bidding aggressively to get it. Then the question becomes for us on page 15, we now can look at the farmers based on size. We can look at farmers, and the first category is from 0 to 500,000. Those farmers are...
These are dollars of sales.
Yeah, these are in dollars, so it's $100. It's all common size to $100. So those farmers had a profit of $17.19. My guess is when I look at these numbers, that's a small farmer, and more than likely what they've done is they don't have labor cost in there. So when you compare them to the larger farmers, a farmer that's in the category of $2 million to $10 million, there's 23 in that category, they had $8 left over. After they paid all their expenses on $100, they made $8. Then we have a group of farmers. These are large farmers. These are farmers across the United States that are row crop farmers from 10 to 50 million. There's 25 in that class, and those made $11 after all their expenses was paid. So this information will help you when you're trying to look at your farming operation. You can look at size to size, make a difference. And then I compared to, because it's kind of odd, the small farmer actually did well compared to the larger farmers, but if you need to look at information over time. So if you look in 2019, I put that in there for you, and you can see the difference of what a year would make. One thing to keep in mind is when you look at this information is that the if you have a database less than 10, RMA won't release the information.
Yeah, that's why there's blank columns.
Blank columns for the...
Yeah. So that one data set has 7, so they didn't release that data, and then the far end has 8, so no information.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
So if we flip on to page 16, the information, Sal, you kind of was leading down the path of that was it's on a $100 basis, and it may be hard to translate. So what I did, I translated the information to actual dollars for you on page 16. That should help you to kind of look at your operations. So this is farmers with assets from 0 to 500,000. Now you get a look at the true dollar amount on those customers, those grain row crop farmers. They had sales of $2 million. The farmers from 10 to 10 million had 7.7 million and had a profit of 981,000. I think for a lot of the row crop farmers that are looking at it, the common size balance sheet is nice, but to seeing the actual dollars will help them to better understand. So.
Okay.
So one of the things we want to do now is we want to flip to page 17, and we want to talk about 3 ratios that most banks care about, which is the current ratio. So the current ratio is current assets divided by current liabilities. So its current asset would be anything that's going to convert to cash within 12 months. A current liability would be anything that would be obligated to be paid within 12 months. So we'll look at the 75 farmers, and the top 25%, the current ratio, the upper, when you look at that graph, you'll see a current portion, upper, that's the top 25%. They have a current ratio of 3 to 1. So what does that mean? They have $300 of current assets compared to $100 of current liabilities. So by the definition of accounting, if you would take that and wait 12 months, those farmers would have $300 left over after they pay all their obligations. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. That would compare to the median, or the one in the middle of the 75. It would be 150. So they would have $150 of current assets compared to $100 of current liabilities. So when all the obligations are paid, they would have $50 left over. So Grant, you and I were talking earlier. So the bottom 25% have a current ratio of 1 to 1. What does that mean to that farmer?
Basically, after they sell all their products, they pay their liabilities, and then they have no money left over.
And that is what the bottom 25% are confronted with. So the bottom 25% would struggle to make payments. They would struggle to make. You'd have to go to your supplier. You'd have to rely on them. So this is an opportunity for you, if you're a farmer, to look at this and say, if I'm in the bottom 25%, what can I do to make a difference? And how do I get to be like the average? And if you're the average at 1.5, what do I have to do to be the top 25%?
Right. And sometimes I think on these current liabilities too, hopefully farmers are including some type of living expense for their living, so that they can survive day to day. But if you're not, that's even going to make some of these numbers possibly look even worse if you're not including family living expenses in there. So be sure you count that. Pay yourself. It's the hardest thing to do, but you need to pay yourself something.
Yes.
And there's also one other financial point of information that we can get from current assets and current liabilities, and that's working capital. So instead of dividing, we're going to subtract current assets from current liabilities. That's going to give us working capital. So that should give you how many dollars you have left at the end of the day as well.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
So the other ratio that we want to talk about is, if you think about it, if you're buying that real estate and you've got those obligations that you're paying back, that's 6.4 years. Here's what's going on after you make all of your, the cash, then you take off the payments that you have obligations for. That top 25% has a ratio of 12.8. So that is a very strong number. It compares to 10.6 and compares to 4.7. So what you're seeing is, after the farmer makes all their obligations to the bank for the mortgage debt, equipment debt, they have cash left over and now are out pursuing and can buy farm real estate. And that's why when we looked at that first graph, there's a small group of farmers has cash, has the ability to buy farms, and they are driving up the land real estate values. So that would compare to the farming group. Next, the median would be $5.40. They're doing well. The challenge is the bottom 25% are showing a negative 2.1. So after they're done, they're short $2.10. And so what's happening in there is, you're seeing on their line of credit, that line of credit each year will go up slightly. the payable that you have wherever you buy your fertilizer from, the cooperative, let's say you owed $100, the next year you would owe, let's say, $102. That number is going to grow over time. So,
and it's been negative every year except 21 that's on the chart.
That is correct. So there's a group of farmers that are always struggling, and they're having to decide either they get better. This is information for you to get better, or some are choosing to do something else. So.
Sometimes you sit there and think, how do these guys continue to go? Because there's always farmers in that instance. And generally what happens is they will refinance all their debts. They'll move current liabilities down to long-term liabilities. Most generally after there's a time of inflation or farm values increased. So they have the ability to borrow more money. And then they move their current liabilities to long-term liabilities, increasing their working capital, increasing their cash on hand, making it so they can pay their bills and move on.
Okay.
So leading into our third ratio that we want to look at is the debt compared to net worth, and that's on page 19 of the presentation. You'll see that the debt obligations are 0.5 to 1. So we would have, for $100 in net worth, we would have $50 of debt obligations. So they're in really good shape, not a lot of leverage. The median farmer would have $130 of debt compared to $100 of net worth. And then the bottom 30 would have $350 of debt obligations compared to $100 of net worth. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Yep.
So then what we want to do is flip on over to page 20. And page 20, one of the things a lot of farmers, want to know is how they doing. Are they growing? What are they doing? Well, if you look on page 2022, the database goes down to 64 farmers. For some reason, we didn't have prior year's information or whatever, but there's 64 in the database. The top 25% sales were up 37.6%. And Grant, you and I was talking earlier, we were talking about that part of that is they have bought farms, but also
the value increase in their grain that
Yes.
they sold. So it's probably gone up, $7 compared to $4.50.
Yes. So that's a big part of that number growing is the price of grain, but some of those farmers, that top 25%, are also growing their operations. How does that compare to the median group? Well, the median group, the one in the middle, was 17, and then the bottom 25% was 3.6%. So another database I wanted to share with the customers of Premier Ag is Kentucky Farm Business Management. This is a case of where the University of Kentucky has people hired. They offer accounting services. So they would come out to your farm and they would review all your records, and they do a phenomenal job. And they help make sure the records are accurate. So we know the information that we're getting ready to present to you coming from the University of Kentucky is a really good database. And what we want to show you today is that the top third of grain farmers make $305 per acre. That would compare to the bottom third that's losing $20 per acre. There is also another website out there that has a lot of good information. It's the Illinois Farm Business Management Records. There is I've listed the way to get to their website, but they have 2,000 grain farmers that they can show you. They have 33 hog operations, and they also have 27 beef, and they also have 37 dairy. So if you have a farmer, let's say, I know today we're talking about row crops, but we wanted to give your other farmers an opportunity to see information that's out there on financial benchmarking. So Ryan, the question heading up is, what do you think are some of the major differences between the top third and the top bottom?
He asked you another question,
Another
Ryan.
question. Yep, I was going to say the same thing.
Yeah, well, there's other
You
people.
can try my it depends.
There's other people at CoBank we'll have back. I know other people in CoBank. So, yeah, that's what I was getting ready to do is cue you up to this information and say, there are obviously things that people are going to attribute to this top third versus the bottom third. And, well, they're born under lucky star, or they're exponentially bigger, or they hit the top of the markets all the time. So I'm hoping that you'll show us that there's a correlation between all of them, and that these aren't insurmountable tasks from this bottom third, and we're not here to judge anyone. Clearly,
No.
this is all confidential data. But if you want to help your position in that lower third, to tell you that it's not. You don't have to lose 200 pounds on this diet. You can figure it out little steps at a time.
We for sure want all of our farmers to do as best they can.
Absolutely. Yeah. This is no judgment call at all. So why don't you tell us how far apart on some of the basic items on their list? What's the difference between the top and the bottom?
So
it's not significant, I don't think, is what one would think.
Yeah, and so again, our whole objective here today is to help your situation. It doesn't matter where you are, what you're doing. Ultimately, this whole presentation and what we're here for is to make your farming operation better, is to give you information that at your fingertip and to look at it. So when you flip to page 22, they do a really good job looking at the farmers in 2020. That's the most current information we have. They have 198 in the database. The bottom third we'll look at, and then the top third we'll look at. So if you compare, the top third does farm more acres, about 27% more acres than the bottom third. So that is a factor. But when you go down and you look at the bottom where it says gross farm returns, the top third are making per acre over $1,100 per acre. That compares to the bottom third of 190. Now, my dad was a farmer. I've been around farmers my whole life.
Hang on a minute.
890.
You said 890. Yeah. On the gross farm returns, you said 190.
Oh.
Sorry, we just want to make sure everybody's following the right numbers.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. The 890. Good. Yep. Correct. Thank you for correcting me.
One other point of information I'd bring up on this. So Ryan said, maybe a farmer was born into a very successful operation that owned land. Well, in this data set, it actually says that the high third owns less land than the low third.
I saw that too, and that does bring up a good point. Yep. This information, again, if the farmer would take time to study it, it has a lot of valuable information.
Right.
And what we're going to do is get into some more of the detail to help you when you're thinking in the future. What does it matter? What are the key differences? So when we flip to page 23, you're going to see that farmers are notorious for trying to buy cheaper, and they should be, and the good ones do. But what does that amount to in dollars and cents? Well, it amounts to $26. When you compare the fertilizer, the pesticides, and seed, it's $26. So that puts it in context of how much better they're doing the top third compared to the bottom third. Grant, you and I talked about this a little bit earlier, which was equipment cost. And if you would, I'll let you kind of weigh in. But the equipment cost is $31 per acre cheaper.
Right. It looked like some acreage was different as well between the top third and the bottom third. So they did farm a little bit more acres. So they probably were able to spread the same equipment across more acres because they probably all have very comparable farm equipment that they're using.
Yep. And in their buildings, they save $11 per acre, and their labor cost is $21 per acre cheaper. So when you add those up, it's across several items that gets them to a lower cost per acre. It's not what you might think of trying to look for the silver bullet. It's good management. Several things. That's the key thing we want to get across.
These larger, more successful guys, they're probably being more efficient is with the products that they're purchasing. Potentially, maybe they're using variable rate technology more, and then that will directly correlate to their labor as well. So if they're using the latest and greatest technology, their labor cost should be lower.
That's correct. So then one of the things I've known farmers all my life, I've worked for farmers all my life, that one of the things that they want to do is sell at the very top of the market. So let's kind of dive into these numbers. And the good thing is we've got good records that we know how these numbers are being produced. So when we look at yellow corn, number 2, they're getting about 4 bushels per acre more production yield. And on soybeans, they're capturing just a couple more bushels per acre. So it's not, again, what you would have expected, this big number. It's it's consistently doing several things right. The other thing that farmers like to talk about is when they sell their products, are they selling at the peak? And so when you look at that, yellow corn, they're selling 5 cents per bushel higher, and on soybeans, they're 2 cents per bushel. So again, it's probably not what you were expecting. The top third are doing many things incrementally better, and this information, as you're looking at your farming operation, as you're planning, maybe there's something here that you can look at that will help your operations get better.
And we're on slide 24 right now for those that are following along. Hopefully you're not driving while you're following along, but that's closer than I thought it would be.
Yeah, this presentation is definitely designed to be at a computer, not
Yeah.
but yeah, it's very close. It's the yields are essentially almost the same in my mind. They're 4 bushels off, and the price is just a nickel more on the corn. That's not a lot. $7 probably.
Closer than I would have thought. So, but it does help to squelch some of that noise that says, well, that they're farming 300-acre ground, or they're they hit the top of the markets, or there's not a ton of insight here that leads to one issue, which is your point on every one of these. So this is fantastic information. So.
Yep.
So really, the top third, they're executing a plan. They're sitting down with their account managers. They're sharpening their pencil.
For sure.
Mm-hmm. They're focused on many things, not just one thing.
Yep.
If I can get that across. So.
Yep.
So Ryan would tell you I'm an unusual person, in that I've been on the customer side about half my life, and then I've also been a banker half my life. And so I've got a unique perspective being a banker and being a customer. On page 25, one of the things I would encourage you to do as you're building out your plan is to sit down with your bank. I don't care who your banker is, and make sure that you know how they look at your loan. Ask them very specifically, how do they look at liquidity, solvency, debt coverage ratio, loan to values? That information that lender should share with you what is ideal for them. And every lender is going to be a little bit different, but what's important is for you to know what your lender expects of you. And it's a fair question to ask that lender and to have that dialogue. So.
And these are the standards. This doesn't come from the study. These are just the standards that most banks they'd be plus or minus a lot of these, whether it's in liquidity or solvency, they would be plus or minus some number, but their
Yes.
board would have determined these.
Yes,
the bank.
that's correct.
Right.
Yep.
All right, next one, the 26 is where the rubber meets the road.
Yeah, so we kind of want to just summarize our presentation today. So we've talked a lot about the financial benchmarking. We talked about what makes the top third grain farmers and what they're doing. And again, when I started this study, I would have told you there was one thing, Ryan, that stood out, that they were selling at the top of the market. They were getting better yields or something. And that wasn't the case. It's a combination. They do sell a little bit better. They get a little bit better yields, but they do a little better job at cost controls. It's all those factors coming together that gives them that differential of over $300 per acre than the bottom third. So when you're trying to develop your plan, is to kind of focus on what makes that top third, is to focus on several things, not just one thing.
Which is good news, because that way you can make some changes in look at your equipment. What are you doing? I mean,
Yes.
It's equipment, it's labor in some cases, it is crop inputs in some other cases. So it gives them several different ways to attack the problem.
That is correct. The other thing I would do is not do this alone. I would encourage you to reach out to your banker, your accountant, sit down with them, take this presentation, put it in front of them, and say, hey, help me come up with a strategy to get better. I want to be, if I'm in the bottom third, how do I get to the middle third? If I'm in the middle third, I'd be focused on how to get to the top third. What I always find when I do this presentation, I do it a lot, the people that are most interesting of that group, which do you think wants to get better? The bottom third, middle third, or top third?
Probably all of them.
It's
top third.
It's the top third.
Top third.
It's the top third of the people that come up to me and say, I want to get better. And it's, I don't care if I'm doing it for cattle, if I'm doing it row crops, if I'm doing, the top third always wants to get better. And that's their mentality. So Sal, you and I talked earlier that possibility, a lot of these farmers are looking to diversify their operations and try to do things that are different. One of the things we talked about was RMA has 580 industries that they can look at. So if you're a farmer and you're a row crop farmer and you're thinking about doing something else, visit with your commercial banker and say, hey, I'm thinking about getting this enterprise. Could I see the database on RMA on this industry? Is it available, and would you share it with me? So that way, as you're trying to get into a new enterprise, you can know what that enterprise looks like. You can also know this is what the banks are going to judge you against. So you might as well have the information in advance, which will help you do a better job at execution. The last thing I want to leave you with is to make sure you know your banker. So, I've been on both sides of the fence. I've had banks come to me. I've interviewed banks. They ask a lot of information. They want to know what my balance sheet is, what my income statement is. They want to know what my plans are, and they go through it in great depth. What I want to encourage every row crop farmer on this call is that you need to know your banker better. So I've listed a site, the FDIC insurance. All the banks are required to every quarter list their financial information. So you can go out and you can get your bank, you type in their name, and you're going to get their balance sheet and income statement, how they're doing. So banks by law are limited by the Federal Reserve that a maximum they can loan any one farmer is 15% of their net worth. Most banks won't lend 15%. The max they'll probably do on their best customers is probably 7%. So what you want to do is look at the net worth and ask the question, how does my loan compare? And if you're dealing with a community bank, and that's a good thing, they're good people, but are you getting up to their house limit? You need to just know that. The other thing I would encourage you to do is look at their loans compared to their deposits. That deposits is how they make their loans. As the bank gets higher a percentage, let's say higher up with 85%, they're loaned up. They're not going to have additional funds to take care of your operations. Just think about that in advance. That is something. This is information that will help you as you're dealing with your banker. And on page 27 is my contact information. If you have questions, you can give me a call. My cell phone's listed, and I'd be happy to try to help you with your questions.
Okay. Well, Lewis, thank you very much.
Absolutely. What a great presentation.
Tremendous amount of information here and very valuable. So we thank you very much and your experience allows you to do this. I know both on both sides of the business as a general manager and then also as a loan officer and vice president at CoBank.
Yep. Thank you.
It's a good opportunity too to say that they're making several management decisions and they're trying to make those decisions better as Premier Ag. We've got it through the credit group with Grant and his bunch. We've Aaron Bledsoe through the grain and the marketing side, our account managers through the crop planning side. I mean, we have the full gamut of folks who can incrementally help each one of these points of decision making here at Premier Ag. So it's good to be able to have that offer.
And speaking of that, I think Grant has got some financing options he wanted to bring up about what we have at Premier Ag.
Right.
For growers.
So we have ways to increase your current liabilities here, but you're going to purchase these items anyway. So I have some the best options that we have here. And when I say best options, I'm looking at two things, fixed rate and the lowest interest rate that I can come up with. So with that being said, best place to stop, Rabo Agri-Finance. Go to grower.raboag.com, fill out your application. You can buy products that are branded Syngenta. 1.9% is the interest rate they charge. That is fixed, due December 15th of 23. Bayer products, 1.9%. That is fixed, due November 15th of 23. BASF products, 0% actually, fixed until December 31st of 23. Syngenta is only unique to the Rabo, or Rabo, however you say it. Bayer, BASF, Rabo, and John Deere Financial as well. So if you got a John Deere Financial account, we can already get those dollars for you to buy your products on your top tier programs. Let's just say you want to buy some products that don't qualify for the Syngenta, Bayer, BASF. We have another program, Secure by Winfield, 4.75 fixed, due February 1st of 2024. So you got right at a whole year of being able to carry those products on your until that's due.
Good. And to use any of these options, just contact their account
Yep.
manager, and
Yep.
they'll
Right.
put them in touch with you or Nate. And
That is correct.
great.
Yep. So talk to your account manager. They'll send them my way, or you could go to grower.raboag.com and have that application submitted and ready to go if it's something you want to do.
All right.
And after you make that decision, call
Yep.
Bledsoe or Jason Newton and sow
Right.
your
So
grain.
you're great.
Sow your grain.
$6 corn, possibly, right? I don't know where we're at. I haven't looked today.
Oh my!
Well, I'll tell you, that's I think that's all we have for this topic, and it's been a very good one. We're going to post this presentation on our website, so you can go back and review and listen to this again while you're parked somewhere or in the evenings you're watching on YouTube. And we'd like to thank everybody for listening in, and that's another episode of the podcast brought to you by Premier Companies.
Thank
you
you.
very much.
Thanks.